Dr. Rachel Hott is a clinical psychologist and an NLP trainer. Since 1986, she has been co-director with her husband Stephen Leeds of the NLP Center of New York. Rachel is one of those rare individuals that does both, maintains an active coaching practice, and leads trainings in NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. So welcome, Rachel Hott, to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. It is so lovely to see you. You are in New York City?
Yes, I live in Williamsburg, which has become the home for all classes and clients, everything, COVID.
So you are the with your husband, Steve, you are the head of the NLP Center of New York and have been doing that for quite some time.
Yeah, we're co-directors of the NLP Center of New York, and we established ourselves since 1986.
Wow. So
just when I was a spring chicken.
Yeah, 12, I think, years old. It was amazing. Precocious.
Do the math.
Wow, amazing. So yeah, I was starting NLP about that same time. I took my first NLP seminar from Tony Robbins in 1985. By 86, I was getting certified, not from the NLP Center of New York, but from...
So I guess you were in California, huh?
I lived in New York, but I traveled to California to the seminars.
Yeah, because I remember hearing about Tony Robbins in the early days. You know, I started about 1981 taking my training, and we would hear about Tony Robbins being this amazing presenter, and he just kind of went a whole other direction, you know, kind of like big. But I think recently he might have had 25,000 people on a Zoom. And Stephen and I are...
Yeah, I think it might have been 30,000. That's true.
Yeah, and we're very comfortable in our groups, which I would say the most I've had now on a Zoom is 20. And the smallest is probably 9. And it's been lovely.
I don't suspect he gets a lot of intimacy in his 30,000 people Zoom call.
Well, we get a lot of people who like the Tony Robbins events.
Oh, yeah.
Discover that he's done NLP, and then they look for us. And a lot of times also they don't always know what to do with everything that occurred, so they come to the training, and, you know, we're very foundational in our NLP. Yeah. It's we're following a curriculum for NLP 1 and NLP 2. So, yeah, it works for us, actually, his campaign.
So I'm going to ask you some questions about that in just a moment, but I want to just for one last few moments talk about Tony Robbins, because we are, but then I want to leave that and come back to essential coaching skills, etc. But yeah, I learned NLP from Tony Robbins. At the time in 1985 when I took his seminar, the Firewalk experience was about how you can use NLP to do these seemingly impossible things like walking across hot burning coals, and that if you really learn NLP well, you can do anything. So that's why you should go to the certification course, which is what I did, and I got certified in NLP from Tony Robbins. And at that seminar, Tony brought the certification, the 2 weeks certification course, 14 days, 15 days. He brought Richard Bandler. He brought Robert Dilts. He brought Tad James and Wyatt Woodsmall, and several other people were there. Dave Dobson were all there.
Early people. I knew Wyatt from when I was doing my training as well.
He was a student with you from...
No, he wasn't a student. We were both training assistants under the tutelage of Annie Linden, who was out in New York City. And we also would have Robert Dilts come in, and we would have Stephen Andreas, Connie Ray Andreas come in, David Gordon. So all the early developers. You know, one thing about the Firewalk, I think the best thing about that is the idea of belief. You know, what we say to ourselves, how we believe, what we can do. You know, I never participated in that Firewalk. The idea, because I would be concerned that people think, oh, that's NLP, right? What I would say is it's more about what you believe you can do. And that's an important piece in the neuro part.
Totally true. What Tony was saying back then is that he modeled a firewalker. And so that, NLP is about modeling the abilities of somebody, whether it's good or bad, but you want to find out how they do that. What's the structure of their subjective experience that allows them to do that behavior. So he said he modeled a firewalker and saw how he did that. So, he distilled it to an NLP strategy of like you keep your eyes up, so you're getting the visuals. You talk to yourself in a certain way, saying things like cool moss, instead of like, oh gosh, I'm going to burn. So you just sort of keep your visual, your auditory, your kinesthetic all within certain boundaries, and then you can walk across hot burning coals. And so it was fun. It was really fun. And that was 1985, 86, and now it's 2020.
Yeah,
and Rachel Hott, you have been doing this for quite some time with your husband, Steve, and truly, you are a icon in the NLP world. I mean,
thanks. Well, I grew up with NLP. I'd say, I did start in my mid-20s. I came from a dance movement therapy background, so I'd already had introduction to psychology. I was moving that direction. I was in the world of more stress management. I was creating relaxation audio cassettes, if you can remember those way back when.
Oh, yes. I remember audio cassettes.
And then discovering NLP through the first book that I read, which was Frogs into Princes. And then going to a workshop, and it just didn't stop.
So did you say you were a dancer or a dance therapy, or what?
Yeah, I really liked dancing, and I really liked working with people. So I found the dance movement therapy master's degree program at Antioch in New Hampshire at the time. And that led me to, how am I going to make money? And I started to create stress management programs, as well as working for a company called American Management Association, where I observed people who were managers and looked for their competency skills. And so my observational skills were getting trained, as well as kind of coding it. And from there, I found NLP through working with a nonverbal communication researcher named Dr. Martha Davis. So you know how things connect.
Yeah.
And that led me to a workshop. And turns out American Management Association was teaching NLP. Somebody from California had sold them a program. So I was right there to be able to teach. It was called Building Better Work Relationships.
Nice.
So I was right there. So everything was putting together. And I met my husband there. So
cool. So
years later, we have, adult children, a business, growing old together, learning about this level, because I said I started in my mid-20s, and here I am. Yeah.
So let me ask you about coaching.
Okay.
Back in those days when we were first learning NLP, I don't know about what you referred to it, but you get trained as a practitioner, then you get trained as a master practitioner, and then you could go up to the trainer level. And there was no such thing as coaching. Coaching was for Little League Baseball or whatever. So what we did, what I did were NLP therapies. It's like, we do an intervention or some sort of NLP process or NLP therapy. As far as you know, when did the word coaching come into the nomenclature, and what was that?
Good question. The early days we would say somebody would be the subject and the programmer, right? That was really kind of harsh language. And then it started to switch to guide and explorer, and then it's moved to this coach client. So, it's not clear, but I have to say there was a time in New York that said people could not call themselves counselors anymore. And that was important, that people had to call themselves something. And I think that coaching started to come in. But when was it? Maybe in the 90s? Obviously somebody listening might say, hey, I'm a coach. I know exactly the history of whatever it was, because there are some more formal coach trainings,
right.
we receive a lot of people who have taken, let's say, an ICF or IPAC or whatever they are. And sorry that I don't know all the names, but they come because they want the NLP skills and the NLP techniques.
Right.
So yes, we put in practitioner coach certification training into our way of presenting it to people, that they get that.
Can I just stop you there for a second, though? So it sounds as if that, in a way, it's no different than it was. It's just that you call it coaching now?
For us, we call it coaching, with the awareness that from what people have educated me about, let's say when you say essential coaching skills, is really understanding outcomes and going forward into the future, and not always saying, hey, we're not going to talk about the past, right? We've got to sort of separate it out. And we have an ability to teach techniques to say, there are some times you have to look at the past, this idea of, I didn't create this quote, but I don't know who said it. You can look at the past, just don't stare at it. So we do use both, but that's what I've understood is the coaching specifics, and we focus a lot on outcome. And then we have techniques, and we pay attention to all the language patterns. So it's a very typical foundational NLP training, NLP 1 and NLP 2, understanding that coach is the nomenclature now. It's like the way people describe themselves, right? And you could do all your reading. Like when I was looking at stress management after I had my dance movement therapy degree, I just read every book about stress management. And then I started calling myself a stress management consultant. Mm-hmm. So there is a level of, none of this has any a governing body per se, even though there is a coaching body that would like that. But, if we're talking about New York legality, I ended up becoming a PhD licensed psychologist. I adhere to that legality, right? But this is a very open territory, kind of like the Wild West.
Kind of like the Wild West. So what would you say is an essential coaching skill? Or perhaps if you had to pick one skill out of all the skills you've had for NLP since the 1980s, et cetera, what would you say that somebody just can't coaching without?
I believe, we use the word rapport as that essential skill. Rapport, many people might be familiar with the idea of emotional intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. How to make connections with people, how to get along, how to listen, basic communication skills that we teach with mirroring. It goes from facial expressions to gestures to body posture. I don't have to tell you. I mean, tempo.
You do have to tell me, because this is a radio interview and nobody knows what you're talking about.
Okay.
So, you don't have to tell me. I know what you're talking about. And what are you talking about? What is mirroring? What is rapport? What are rapport skills from an NLP perspective? Okay.
Well, first of all, right now we're dealing with Zoom culture, right? Yeah. Or FaceTime. So we may only see, half of our body. So when I'm teaching a class and we're talking about rapport, we say, okay, notice the other person. So right now I'm bringing up my two hands and gesturing, right?
Yes.
And you're listening. As you're listening, you wouldn't do this. That wouldn't make sense, right?
But when I start talking, if I started to use my hands in the same way, then you would see something that's very common to what you've done.
That's right. And that unconsciously starts to communicate something that we can't always say what, because we're dealing with more of a feeling, but the idea would be a connection.
Right.
So we pay attention to mirroring. Clearly, mirroring has existed for centuries. If you look at cultures that have rituals of dance, together, moving the same way, you see a young child, you get down on their same level, right? So a lot of this is unconscious. So we pay attention to how somebody is. You could say, Doug, we're also looking at form and content. Yeah. What I've just described, just hand gestures or getting down a level, would be form. Content would be, if I throw you a line like, it's so beautiful out when I look at the window. I see the clouds and they look like tall mountain peaks, right?
Yeah, it's really. I really appreciate views like that because you really see these beautiful things of nature.
That's right. And so in that case, you mirrored my language, particularly in a visual area, right?
Right.
So we teach all of that. And what I said before about
I might stop you again. So the opposite of that then would be this: if you were using your hands and I just sort of sat like this and didn't move at all.
Yeah, so extreme, isn't it? Like it does. It may not be that extreme.
Oh, it's just the opposite, though.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to get across to folks who are listening or perhaps watching that. What mirroring is basically matching as much of the other than conscious communication that's happening between people. Tony Robbins used to say that people who are like each other tend to like each other. That the birds of a feather flock together. There's this.
Right. I mean, the work is how to have rapport with people who disagree with you, right? Mm. In our culture today, we're dealing with so many factions. To look at COVID, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Black Lives Matter. Do people recognize the importance, environment, politics, right? So the challenge isn't so much how you and I mirror, because we already have a relationship.
Right.
And it's really, so when you say what's the essential skill of coaching, yes, rapport, yes, mirroring, and then learning how to help somebody where they may be in a relationship where there's some disagreement. And let's keep in mind, sometimes it's our relationship with ourselves. How do we understand? And that might be a subtle, not so much mirroring as about being able to connect. And that's another piece, like let's say an essential skill for coaching is understanding when is it about you and another person, and when is it about like, hey, you know what, this sounds like there's some part of you, right? And that's NLP language too, right? When we look at the parts.
Right. So that's really interesting. So rapport is essential. You must have rapport. It's like the basic building block. Without that, there's no connection, there's no relationship, there's no listening, there's no real movement. Once that has been established, let's just assume that we can do that. What then would be a second essential coaching skill?
Yeah, sort of interesting,
move them
right?
from
like
here to where they want to get to.
The steps, right? So all of that rapport, learning how, what you did with me about noticing the views, right? Really being able to pay attention to the language and the content. In that essential moment, the next step would be in finding out what does the person want. I mentioned it before, really looking at the outcome. Some people may say goal. If you hold on to the idea that sometimes a goal is, I want to have a 4-bedroom house. That's like a very specific goal. I'm not a real estate person, right? So I wouldn't know how to help you with that. But if you say, I really want to feel comfortable in a new home, I want to feel confident as I start to pursue my new house or domicile or whatever, that I could do. And so then I would look at the essential pieces of building an outcome, which you let me know if you want me to go through that.
Well, just touch on them briefly. So there's a skill, what you're talking about, an NLP skill about finding the steps to what we call a well-formed outcome.
Yeah. So, I like talking with you just to say, you're an NLP trainer, and so it's interesting. Like, of course, all of this, and you're just doing, pulling it out of me, but we could definitely go back and forth. So anyway, I appreciate you asking me. So for me, it would be listening to, often the person says, I don't want to feel anxious anymore.
Right. I don't want to feel this
Yeah. So that's, and it's so often that when I say, okay, so what do you want? We've established rapport, that the story will come up, I don't know, should I go back to work, or, I'm dealing with my family. And of course, I need to listen and in a caring way say, as you're describing that, help me understand what is it that you want. So I do my best to bring to the outcome. And in that outcome, it would be, just like you said, it's stated in the negative. So I would help to say, well, what do you want? And that already is very different, right, for the neurology to be kind of translating that. So that would be one of the pieces.
Great. So let me also ask you this. What I'm asking all the guests on the Essential Coaching Skills podcast is basically two ways of looking at essential skills for a coach to have. One is, how do you do coaching? But then also, what would be an essential skill for someone to be a coach? Because let's say somebody has gone through the NLP trainings or a coaching certification training of some kind, and they are ready. I'm ready. I can help people. I can really, I can do the rapport thing. I can establish outcomes. I can help people get there. But
I have all the techniques. Yeah.
Yeah, but how do I be a coach that makes money and a living as a?
I think what I've noticed with people who I know as NLP colleagues would be the proactive ability within, when we talk about our meta program patterns.
Okay.
So proactive rather than receptive. We don't say one is better than the other. In this case, I believe being proactive would be, how do you make things happen? Right? So the dream is really important. You followed through. You made it happen by taking a training. Yeah. And then the next question is, how do you make it happen? And I think that your good old networking is one of the finer pieces of putting yourself out there. So
describe what that means to our
listeners. Well, networking right now, we would think a lot about is what is our social media connection? So right? So we have Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and then we have our classic, who are our friends, who are our colleagues. How do we start to announce, this is what I'm doing now. Would you like to have a one-on-one meeting to talk about it? And, I'm offering this package, right? But to really do a campaign and then do follow-ups to really be prominent as the initiator. I think that has really helped people to create the people who I see who are getting beyond their NLP certificate are the ones that take action.
To take action, to be proactive. And do you guys teach that sort of thing? Do you have...
I do within the training by talking about other people and stories, and many people will say, hey, how do you do that? And so sometimes in a break or one-on-one I will, but typically our curriculum, which is about a 144-hour curriculum, it varies because sometimes we're doing full days, sometimes like tonight I'm teaching a 3-hour evening that's going to go on until October, 2 nights a week. Oh, but in that curriculum, we're really covering what you and I just started with, all the different rapport pieces and outcomes and then many, many, many techniques. So that question in our training really is on a one-on-one basis. So recently somebody graduated and I chatted with him and we went over what he's been doing and how he's going to go forward, But Doug, I don't know about you, but so many people are like in their 40s when they start training with it. Like they're full adults, fully capable. Yeah. And it's a little bit of like, I trust that they know how to do this. And if they ask, then I...
That's interesting, actually. I've had a lot of that as well in the trainings that I've taught, the NLP and hypnosis trainings that I've taught. I don't say it's a majority, but it's a good representative chunk of people who are like 40 or more. But interestingly, many of them have not ever had to be an entrepreneur or a solopreneur. They've had a job, so they got through college, they moved to New York or whatever, the story is, and they got a job, as a legal secretary or something like that, and they just had to go to work every morning and then just got tired of it after 20 years or something, and decided they wanted to do something more exciting. So they wanted to be a coach or something like that. And then so they took the coach training, and then they thought that now that I'm certified in NLP, now that I have this really wonderfully colorful piece of paper on my wall with a really good frame around it, I'm done. I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to be a coach, and people will beat a path to my door, and it just doesn't always work.
Well, you know what? It doesn't, and they got to a good part of the path, right? And then the question would be, what next, change the metaphor, what next door do I need to open, right? So looking at what hasn't been done yet. And I like to ask people, think about your niche at work. Who do you already know? Even with Zoom now, this culture, we would still probably have lunch and learn. These opportunities for people to feel connected and community. And as you're involved in a company, if you haven't left your day job, right? Excuse me.
Sure.
So I would say, use your niche and also your specialty. If you're right, though, you're so right about this idea of entrepreneurship and what does it take to take yourself on the road? How do you build your business? So look at what's happened now. Most people have had to work at home for a certain period of months.
Yeah, it's true.
So some skills are becoming, people are adapting. They're learning about structuring their own time, right? And so that level of follow through, or knowing that you're accountable to yourself. So all these things are occurring on some level. And then our coaching culture. There are so many different types of coaching. NLP is so wonderful because it fits into so many possibilities, right? If it's athletic, or if it's chiropractic, if it's acupunctures, mental health, of course, the executive coaching, music. I mean, I've seen every possible profession take the NLP system into their own niche. And that's wonderful. There's so much creativity there. So I think people have so much possibility. Is there room for more business out there? As long as you look at your billions. Doug, I don't know, in terms of advertising, that's a whole other piece, right? There's an investment. There's an investment there to figure out that, with your budget.
Yeah. No, but I think you're right. Knowing your niche seems to be one of the most important pieces because, it seems like that there are thousands or millions or perhaps billions of coaches now where there maybe weren't any 20 years ago, 10, that you could count. But now they're coming out of the woodwork. So how does one differentiate oneself from the crowd? How do you become that purple cow in the field, to borrow a phrase? That the one that stands out is different from the rest. How do you find that niche?
Yeah, I think it's a good question about reputation. And, look, you're doing a blog that puts you out into the public world. Not a blog, a podcast. Right?
Yeah.
And other people might write, and other people may have newsletters.
And that is just, if I might stop again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one must continually change and innovate. I mean, when I first started this back in the 80s, the way I built a clientele for my NLP therapy practice, as it was called back then, was I put advertisements in magazines, local New York City magazines like the Free Spirit and
I remember.
Yeah, and New Life magazine, and I put an ad back there, and it was a print ad, and then I put a listing in the phone book in the yellow pages.
Well, listen, your listenership right now may say like, "What?"
I know.
It's all Instagram now, right? It's all.
I know nothing about Instagram. I suck at that sort of thing. I really must must figure out.
They have to go to Instagram coaching for that.
You're right, exactly.
Yeah, part of it is who you hire out. TaskRabbit moment. Of what are the people who are your support network who might have that better awareness. As what my skill set, my best skill set is working with clients. I'd say. And as well as leading training. This second or third piece about business, I have a partner, Stephen, and I work a lot. He's got a great handle on the backbones of our business, and I do some of the front end. And then, sure, we have to have some people. So that's, again, the entrepreneur doesn't have to be completely alone, right?
Right.
But using your NLP skills in that is really essential, right? To be able to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I need to get there? This idea of the dream and then the realist and then really looking at what is getting in the way, right? Yeah. All of those techniques that we teach can be utilized for yourself and directing yourself. I just love when people do the training and then say that, something has really changed in their life. Whether or not I know the program is specifically about coaching, but I see it as one of those life-changing pieces. Not everybody who comes to our training at the NLP Center is going to become a coach. Mm-hmm. They all work towards that, but everybody comes for personal development.
Yeah,
right?
Very true. Yeah, it's one of the beautiful things about having done this for so long is to have seen so many people transform in so many ways. It's quite a wonderful aspect of doing these trainings is that people get this profound, sometimes personal growth from this experience.
And it's just so interesting, right? We started in the 80s. We're talking about communication, and we realize here we are, 2020. Communication is still essential. Whether or not we all have chips, whether or not we're all looking on our computer right now. Right. I find it fascinating that our educational system doesn't really work this out, that it's our NLP groups, which, by the way, there are more in Europe and Asia than there are in the United States. There are fewer here now, but quite a bit out in the world.
That's also, of course, one of the wonderful things about what we're doing right here, right now. This Zoom call or Skype or other ways of communicating globally. It's quite remarkable that certainly didn't exist in the 80s. I remember when I got my first fax machine, it was like, oh my God, you put the phone in the cradle. You literally put the phone in the cradle. It was a big suitcase-sized thing, and it had this the phone cradle in the thing, and you dial it up, and it was amazing. And it was
there's so much that has changed every decade. Like now there's a NLP conference that's being planned in March, and it will be all online. Yeah. Actually, you have Connie Ray Andreas, who she'll be speaking. She'll be a keynote, right? So that's really different. All these things are happening in the now, and we still have the basics. Just how do we understand people? How do we get along?
How do we understand people, right? The humans that are behind that. I was talking with one of my coaching clients the other day, and he's subscribed to the Daily Stoic. And it's just so interesting that Stoicism, which is like, 3,000 years old or something, is relevant today. It's very, very relevant, not just today, 2020, but as modern humans. We still are humans. We still have to communicate, and we still use the same tools for doing that, even though it's visual, through a computer right now and audio.
Yeah. Fortunately, right? I mean, it's frightening when somebody thinks that maybe they'll have a robot in their home and they, kind of connect to that, right? I think there's some stories about people getting attached to their smartphones or speakers. So let's get human, And NLP is very much, it's funny, the name neuro-linguistic programming, especially in the 80s when I came around. I was like, what? That's so harsh.
Tony always talked about it as a technology, and that's kind of sort of what it was.
It's harsh, but when you get the energy of it, it's really, so connected to understanding yourself and others and getting along with people. And at least that's the way we teach it. I think there are some people looking for how do I get one over on somebody? And that's not my style.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It's one of the things I'm afraid is unfortunate about NLP is that it's drawn a lot of that to it, and it's got some of those get over on the other person type of seminars available out there. And
maybe. Sorry.
I was just going to say, as a teacher of sleight of mouth, I've made a little bit of I wrote a book on sleight of mouth, so people know me as that. I get a lot of people who want to learn that because they think that's what it is. It's the tricky, the sneaky, the sleight of mouth. The tricks. The sleight of mouth sounds like a magic trick. I'm going to fool you.
Sleight of hand. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So maybe an essential skill for a coach is knowing how to sell what they really are doing when somebody says, oh, NLP, isn't that stuff that you can get somebody to do something,
right?
Or, oh, I don't want to do that. And so the skill of being able to communicate, I do have many tools and I make choices how to utilize them with you for the better good for you.
Yeah, I like it. So let me ask you this. If you had an elevator speech, let's just say hypothetically, I meet you in a not that this will ever happen again in humankind, but let's pretend we're at a resort somewhere and happen to meet each other not wearing masks. We're just human beings being human. And I said, so what do you do? And what would you say? How would you describe NLP coaching in a succinct
Wow. Okay. Let's see. So let's say, hey, Doug, nice to meet you. What do I do? Well, I'm an NLP trainer and coach, also a licensed psychologist. So I have many hats. And NLP is a communications technology that helps us change our thoughts, feelings, and behavior in simple, subtle ways. There are many techniques that we use. And if your attention span is still there, I might look at you and be like, would you like more? Because I often know that sometimes that might be just enough until the person asks a question. Right?
Yeah.
So from your perspective as my friendly new friend in the resort, which is thank you for taking me on a little vacation right now. Would you want to know more, or is that enough?
So communication technology, what do you mean? It's a phone systems?
So as we're talking right now, we could say that our neurology, we have a variety of ways that we think. So in our NLP technology, we're exploring our subjective experience. And in our subjective experience, we have many different ways based on our senses, our visual, auditory, how we feel, our emotions, what we're aware of, our smell or taste. And then guess what? I'm expressing it through language, right? That's the linguistic part. And I don't know, maybe you're getting it, maybe you're not.
But I'm getting it, certainly. And what I do agree with you that the thing about NLP is it sounds on the surface, neuro-linguistic programming to be this, kind of scientific, technological, inhuman, robotic kind of thing. But in fact, it does get to the core of us as being humans, because the neurological computer that we have isn't just data. It isn't just what you type in on a keyboard. It's not just zeros and ones. We smell things, we taste things, we hear things, the loudness, the closeness. There's all these different variations of the input that's happening to us as humans. And then, the intercommunication that happens with us. How do we talk about that to ourselves, how we feel about that to ourselves, makes a huge difference in how we, take action in the world, and how we communicate with other human beings like you and me right now. It's an enormously complex system, which is why NLP is so important, I think, because it helps you to understand how this all works together. And then when you can get a handle on that, it's not programming like you program a computer, but it's like, what kind of way are you acting as a human being? What kind of things do you do, and what kind of response do you get that is effective? And one of the hallmarks of NLP is if what you're doing is working, keep doing it. Mm-hmm. And if what you're doing isn't getting you closer to your goal, well, do something else, do something.
Yeah. The programming is so great to become aware, right, of what may be unconscious, and to discover what you can alter and change, and perhaps just continually tinker with, and to discover that there are many similar, what was NLP informed by, psycholinguistics, right? Mm-hmm. Different psychologies, Gestalt, humanistic, family systems, all of that, put together. And then maybe something unique came about. So let's say with cognitive psychology, somebody could be asked, well, what are you saying to yourself, right? And the person goes, of course, I'm not saying anything to myself. But then they say, well, I say that I'm not worth anything. And the NLP, in the technology piece, right, that's when we say, and how is it said? What kind of voice? Is it close? Is it far? Is it your voice? And how do you change it? And so that level I haven't seen in any other psychologies. And that's always interesting, right? Like what became unique, or even all of our anchoring, it's not as if people don't know about, stimulus response, but really working on connecting. And I think Tony Robbins says managing state. But in the training, really, how do you harness your resource state? How do you bring it in? So today I'm in my confidence state. Really, I feel like I'm in that place, and I can get access to that state. I think those are some nice pieces of NLP that are kind of like finer points of all that we've been informed by.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And Tony often was talking about managing your state, and he said that is perhaps, I think if he was here today, might say that is an essential coaching skill, is how do you keep yourself in a confident state when you need a confident state? How do you put yourself into that if this lecture, this interview was scheduled for today and you weren't in a confident state at 10 minutes before the hour?
That's right.
How would you get yourself there in order to do what you're doing and do such an interview? Another
essential skill, right?
Yeah.
So many ideas that come through, and knowing that there's a way that you have to present yourself and to be authentic, and recognizing that if I was having an off day, I would have to find a way to take care of myself. When I'm with my client, I'm really with my client no matter what.
Right. Yeah, so that you want to be, but let's just go there for a second. That's something Stephen Gilligan would call the coach state or something, perhaps. How do you get yourself into a place where you are ready to see a client?
I'm very connected to time frames. So when I know it's a scheduled moment, I prepare myself. We were talking before we were interviewed, and I asked you about your musical background. So I would imagine you kind of know as soon as the conductor goes, you're like on, right?
Yeah.
And I think I know that from dance, like ready and then go.
Right.
So
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yes, I used to have those numbers all the time. So I believe I'm clear. I know my boundaries. I like that. Did I always have that? If I go back to the early days, I think I had to really recognize, okay, this is something I'm doing. Now it's probably more unconscious, but when you ask me, I'd say it's not having time frames, being aware of time, clearly, like this is my client's time. And I have a specific memory of one time when one of our kids were in college and they called to say they'd just gotten a dog, and I was so annoyed. I'm like, really? And then I had to go back into the training room at that time, and I was like, boom, I was on. I didn't need to share that with the group at that time.
Right.
And, I was able to. So I think there's something about being able to place yourself in context.
Right. And what's also really interesting to me about that is that it doesn't mean that you don't care about the dog and the kids and that sort of thing. It just means that you have been able to, in a sense, compartmentalize the life of it. So this is very important here, and I'll come back to here later. And right now, this is what's important. So I'm doing this.
Yeah, and that dog is still around 13 years later. She's like sleeping in the corner over there. The story hasn't ended.
Has it become your dog then?
Of course, that was part of the prediction. Yes.
That's very funny. I'm glad. And your kids are how old now?
They're not kids, they're in their 30s, mid-30s. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow, good for you. How old is the dog?
13.
That's great.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that the NLP brings to the field of coaching skills that are truly essential. I sometimes wonder how the heck people can do coaching without any NLP skills whatsoever. It boggles my mind that people can do that.
Mm-hmm. I guess, you bring in a big issue that could be, are there coaching programs that are introducing NLP? And sometimes people come in and say, oh, we did that in a coaching training. So, there can be some watered down pieces, but, I feel like what we offer is very authentic NLP. It's truly the curriculums that have been developed with, clearly some new additions, like you mentioned, Stephen Gilligan, and I continually study with him. So sure, I may add in something about his languaging, which his languaging is often welcome, that part. I mentioned the part earlier. He's always saying welcome to the part. And the part is the one that gets in the way. Oh, I want to be proactive. Rachel said I should be proactive. But there's this part of me that says, it would be better to just, read a book. So we would say, welcome that part. That's kind of newer language for me in my 2020.
Right. Well, Rachel Hott, thank you so much for being here with us.
You're
I
welcome.
always enjoy seeing you and talking with you.
Thank you.
But really, thank you for sharing such valuable insights with us.
It's fun to talk with you, Doug. It's nice.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So you be safe out there in Williamsburg.
Okay, can I do a quick pitch?
Oh, yeah, please. Yes, please do.
The quick pitch is that Stephen and I wrote 2 books. One is called NLP, A Changing Perspective.
Yeah.
And the other one is called NLP Meta Program Patterns. So hopefully people can, check those out in our Amazon.
Where would people find you? What is your website and et cetera?
The website is nlptraining.com. And
wow, that's a good URL. nlptraining.com.
Yep. NLP Center of New York. We're doing our classes on Zoom and clients FaceTime and Zoom. So
by the way, it's one of the really cool things about this horrible pandemic we've been having is it's kind of forced us to do things we never would have done before. I mean, all of your trainings were live at the NLP Center of New York. It is still a center, a place in New York City where people would come to do these trainings, and now it's all online, so people can tune in from anywhere.
That's right.
Which is amazing.
That's right. So, we look for silver linings, as NLPers, we create reframes, right?
Yeah, right. So now you're the NLP center of the world.
I feel my center. That's what it is. NLP in my center. So, thank you, and be well too. I appreciate you contributing, to the listenership, to the viewership, whomever. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for joining me.
If you want any more information about today's show, please visit our website at www.essentialcoachingskills.com. Be sure to tune in again next week for our next episode and discover even more about the systems and the secrets that set the best apart.